I was signing away my $10 million mansion with tears streaming down my face, while my husband stood over me, his hand gripping my shoulder so hard it left bruises. And I had no idea that in exactly 72 hours, a lawyer would walk into my sister's living room with documents proving my husband had just committed multiple felonies, and that signature I was about to give would become the very evidence that would send him to prison. I remember the exact moment I fell in love with David. It was 12 years ago at a charity gala in downtown Boston. I was 31, he was 34, and I had just sold my third tech startup for an amount that still makes me uncomfortable to say out loud. I was wearing a silver dress that cost more than my first car, feeling completely out of place among old money and inherited wealth, when this man walked up to me and said something that made me laugh so hard I snorted champagne through my nose. He didn't try to impress me with business talk or wealth, he just made me feel seen. David was a senior partner at a mid-sized investment firm, successful but not obscenely wealthy like some of the people in my new circle. He drove a sensible BMW, lived in a nice but modest condo in Cambridge, and when he took me to dinner, he actually listened when I talked about the loneliness of sudden wealth, about how my old friends treated me differently now, about how I missed the simplicity of my life before the money. He understood, or at least I thought he did. He never made me feel guilty about my success. He celebrated it. He said he was proud of me. He said he loved me for who I was, not what I had. We got married 14 months later in a small ceremony on Cape Cod. I was so happy I cried through the entire reception. My mother, who had passed away 2 years before my first big exit, wasn't there to see it, but I felt her presence in every moment. David's family was warm and welcoming. His mother hugged me and whispered that she had been praying for a daughter like me. His father, a retired accountant, told me I was the best thing that ever happened to his son. I believed them all. The mansion came 3 years into our marriage. I had been living in a comfortable but unremarkable townhouse, and David's condo, while nice, never really felt like home to either of us once we combined our lives. We started looking at properties together, and I fell completely in love with this Mediterranean-style estate in Wellesley. It sat on 4 acres of perfectly manicured grounds with a circular driveway, a fountain that looked like something from a European palace, and floor-to-ceiling windows that flooded every room with natural light. The master suite alone was larger than the entire apartment I had lived in during my 20s when I was bootstrapping my first company. David seemed hesitant at first. He said it was too much, too ostentatious, not really us. But I wanted it so badly. I wanted a family home, a place where we could raise children, host holidays, create memories that would last generations. I had worked so hard for so many years, sleeping 4 hours a night, risking everything I had, and this house represented all of that sacrifice paying off. I wanted to enjoy it. I wanted to share it with the man I loved. I paid for it in full. $11.2 million cash. David's name wasn't on the deed. It didn't seem important at the time. We were married. What was mine was his, what was his was mine. Or so I believed. My attorney, a sharp woman named Patricia, who had handled all my business deals, suggested a post-nuptial agreement when I made such a large purchase. She said it was just good practice, that it would protect both of us. I remember laughing and telling her that David wasn't like that we didn't need legal protections from each other. I actually felt offended that she would suggest my husband might ever try to take advantage of me. Patricia looked at me across her mahogany desk with an expression I couldn't quite read at the time. Now I know it was pity. She said quietly that she hoped I was right, but that in her 30 years practicing law, she had seen too many brilliant, successful women make the same assumption. I told her she was being cynical. I told her that not every marriage was a transaction, that some people actually loved each other. She didn't push it. She just made a note in my file and moved on. We moved into the mansion in June. I'll never forget that first night, walking through those enormous rooms, David's hand in mine, both of us giddy with excitement. We ordered pizza because we hadn't unpacked the kitchen yet, and we ate it sitting on the marble floor of the dining room, our voices echoing in the empty space. David pulled me close and said this was just the beginning, that we were going to fill this house with love and laughter and children. I believed every word. The first few years were beautiful. I was so happy. David seemed happy too. We hosted dinner parties, holiday gatherings, charity fundraisers. I loved watching people's faces when they first walked through our front door, the way their eyes would widen, the gasps of appreciation. David always played the proud husband, showing guests around, telling them how hard I had worked for all of this. He seemed genuinely proud. I never noticed the edge in his voice, the slight tightness around his eyes when people praised my success. Looking back, I can see the warning signs I missed. Little things. The way he started making comments about how much I spent on decorating, even though it was my money. The way he would sigh when I mentioned business opportunities, saying I should slow down, enjoy life more, let him handle some things. The way he gradually took over more and more of our household finances, saying he was just trying to help, to take things off my plate so I could relax. I trusted him completely. When he suggested we consolidate our accounts to make things simpler, I agreed. When he offered to handle the property taxes and insurance on the house, I was grateful. When he started managing my investment portfolio, bringing home papers for me to sign without reading them carefully, I signed them. He was my husband. He was a financial professional. Why wouldn't I trust him? The change in him was so gradual I didn't see it happening. He started working longer hours, coming home later, seeming distracted and stressed. When I asked what was wrong, he would snap at me, then immediately apologize, saying work was difficult, that his firm was going through restructuring, that he was under a lot of pressure. I tried to be supportive. I would make his favorite meals, plan special date nights, suggest weekend getaways. He would smile and thank me, but there was a distance growing between us that I couldn't quite bridge. Then came the conversations about money, about how we were spending too much, living beyond our means. I found this confusing because I know exactly how much wealth I had. Even with our lifestyle, we were nowhere near any kind of financial trouble. But David would show me spreadsheets, complicated financial documents, quarterly statements that seemed to show declining assets. He spoke quickly, using technical terms, making it all sound very urgent and concerning. I felt stupid asking him to slow down and explain. He was the expert. I had built companies, but I had always had CFOs and accountants handle the complex financial management. I created products, led teams, closed deals. I wasn't a finance person. He started talking about liquidating some assets, downsizing, making smart financial moves before things got worse. I resisted. I loved our home. I didn't understand why we needed to make such drastic changes. He would get frustrated with me, saying I wasn't being realistic, that I was being emotional instead of logical, that I needed to trust him. He said it with such conviction, such authority, that I started to doubt myself. Maybe I was being naive. Maybe I didn't understand our financial situation as well as I thought. The pressure increased over months. David became more insistent, more urgent. He said we needed to act now, that waiting would only make things worse. He brought home more documents, more spreadsheets, more projections showing financial disaster if we didn't make changes immediately. I started having trouble sleeping. I felt anxious all the time. The man I loved was telling me we were in trouble, and I felt helpless to fix it. Then came the night that changed everything. It was a Tuesday in October, unseasonably cold, with rain hammering against the windows. David came home at 9:30, which was early for him lately. He was carrying his briefcase and a leather folder I had never seen before. His face was set in an expression I had learned to recognize over the past few months. Determined, slightly impatient, with an undercurrent of something I couldn't quite identify. He found me in the library, curled up on the window seat with a book I wasn't really reading. He sat down across from me and opened the folder without any preamble. He said we needed to talk about the house. He said the situation had become critical. He said that if we didn't take action immediately, we were going to lose everything. I felt my stomach drop. I asked him what he meant, what had changed, why everything was suddenly so urgent. He pulled out documents, spreading them across the coffee table between us. He talked quickly, his voice taking on that professional tone he used when he was explaining financial concepts. He said that due to changes in the market, due to some investments that had gone bad, due to tax implications I hadn't properly prepared for, we were facing a significant financial crisis. He said the only solution was to transfer the house into a trust he had set up. He said it would protect the asset from creditors, from potential lawsuits, from the various financial problems we were facing. He said it was a standard wealth protection strategy, that rich people did it all the time. He made it sound so normal, so reasonable, so necessary. I asked if I could have my attorney look at the documents. David's expression hardened. He said we didn't have time, that Patricia would just charge me thousands of dollars to tell me what he was already telling me for free. He said that if I didn't trust him, if I didn't believe he had my best interests at heart after 8 years of marriage, then maybe we had bigger problems than our finances. The guilt hit me like a physical force. Here was my husband trying to help me, trying to protect our assets, and I was questioning him. I was being paranoid and suspicious. I was treating him like an adversary instead of a partner. I felt ashamed. But something in me still resisted. I said I needed time to think, to understand what I was signing. David's expression hardened. He said we didn't have time, that Patricia would just charge me thousands of dollars to tell me what he was already telling me for free. He said that if I didn't trust him, if I didn't believe he had my best interests at heart after 8 years of marriage, then maybe we had bigger problems than our finances. The guilt hit me like a physical force. Here was my husband trying to help me, trying to protect our assets, and I was questioning him. I was being paranoid and suspicious. I was treating him like an adversary instead of a partner. I felt ashamed. But something in me still resisted. I said I needed time to think, to understand what I was signing. David stood up abruptly. He started pacing, running his hands through his hair in that agitated way he had developed lately. He said there wasn't time to think. He said the documents needed to be filed by Friday, or we would lose our window to protect the assets. He said I was being irrational, emotional, that I was letting fear cloud my judgment. Then he did something I had never seen him do before. He started to cry. Not dramatic sobs, but quiet tears running down his face as he told me how hard he had been working to fix this mess, how scared he was that we were going to lose everything, how much pressure he was under trying to protect us. He said he felt like he was drowning, like he was failing as a husband, like I didn't respect him or trust him anymore. I broke. I went to him and held him while he cried against my shoulder. I told him I was sorry, that I did trust him, that I was just scared. He pulled back and looked at me with those eyes I had fallen in love with 12 years ago and said that everything was going to be okay, that he would take care of us, that I just needed to trust him this one time. We sat down at the dining room table, the same table where we had eaten pizza on the floor that first night in this house. David laid out the documents, showing me where to sign. There were so many pages. He guided my hand to each spot, explaining quickly what each section meant, using language that sounded official and proper, but that I didn't fully understand. I asked questions. He answered them, but his answers created more confusion, and I was so tired, so emotionally wrought that I couldn't think clearly. I picked up the pen. My hand was shaking. David put his hand over mine, steadying it, and said that this was the right thing to do, that I was protecting us, protecting our future. I signed the first page, then the second, then the third. With each signature, I felt something inside me tightening, a sense of wrongness that I couldn't articulate. But David was there, his hand on my shoulder, squeezing it in what I thought was reassurance, but that was actually hard enough to hurt. I signed the last page. David immediately gathered up all the documents, put them back in the folder, and said he would take care of filing everything. He kissed my forehead and told me I had done the right thing, that everything was going to be fine now. Then he went upstairs to his office, and I sat alone at that table, feeling like I had just done something terrible, but not understanding what. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed next to David, listening to him breathe, feeling more alone than I had ever felt in my life. Something was wrong. I knew something was wrong, but I had just signed documents I didn't fully understand, trusting my husband to protect me, and now I couldn't take it back. The next morning, David was in an unusually good mood. He made coffee, kissed me goodbye, told me he loved me. He seemed lighter, happier than he had been in months. I tried to match his energy, but I felt hollow. I spent the day wandering through the mansion, touching the walls, looking at the art we had collected, sitting in rooms I had decorated with such care. For the first time since we had moved in, this house didn't feel like mine. 3 days later, everything fell apart. I was having lunch with my sister, Caroline, at a cafe in Newton. Caroline was 4 years younger than me, a civil rights attorney with a practice in Cambridge. She had never particularly liked David, though she had kept her opinions mostly to herself over the years. But that day, as I picked at my salad and tried to pretend everything was fine, she looked at me with concern and asked what was wrong. I found myself telling her everything, about the financial pressure, about the documents, about signing away the house. I expected her to reassure me that David was probably right, that it was probably a normal financial strategy. Instead, her face went completely white. She put down her fork very carefully and asked me to repeat exactly what I had just said. I told her again. She pulled out her phone and started typing furiously. She asked me what kind of trust it was. I said I didn't know, that David had explained, but I hadn't really understood. She asked if I had copies of the documents. I said no, that David had taken them to file. She asked if I had my own attorney review them before signing. I said no. Caroline closed her eyes for a long moment. When she opened them, she looked at me with an expression of anger and pity that made my blood run cold. She said we needed to leave immediately. She said we were going to her office. She said I needed to tell her everything, every detail, and then we were going to call someone. That someone turned out to be Marcus Chen, a real estate and estate planning attorney who had worked with Caroline on several cases. Marcus was in his early 50s with silver-streaked black hair and the kind of sharp, assessing gaze that missed nothing. Caroline had him on speakerphone before we even got back to her office. She explained the situation in quick, professional terms. I heard Marcus swear softly on the other end. He asked me detailed questions about the documents, about what David had told me, about the circumstances under which I had signed. With every answer I gave, I could hear his breathing get heavier. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Charles River. He had called in his partner, a woman named Jennifer Rodriguez, who specialized in fraud and elder law. They both looked grim as they asked me to go through everything again, this time taking detailed notes. Marcus asked if I could get copies of the documents I had signed. I said I would try. He said it was critical, that without seeing what I had actually signed, he couldn't tell me definitively what David had done, but based on my description, he had serious concerns. He asked if David had access to my email, my computer, my phone. I said yes to all of them. Marcus and Jennifer exchanged a look that made my chest tighten. Jennifer leaned forward and spoke to me in a gentle but firm voice. She said that what I was describing sounded like financial coercion at best and fraud at worst. She said that having me sign documents under pressure without independent legal review, telling me that there was a financial crisis that may or may not have actually existed, could constitute several different types of illegal behavior. She said we needed to move very carefully, very quickly, and that I needed to not let David know that I was seeking legal advice. I felt like I was going to be sick. I asked them if they really thought David would do this to me, if they thought my husband of 8 years was actually trying to steal my house. Marcus didn't sugarcoat it. He said that in his 25 years of practice, he had seen exactly this scenario play out dozens of times. He said that financial abuse in marriage often looked exactly like what I was describing, gradual isolation from financial information, creation of artificial urgency, pressure to sign documents without review, claims of crisis that couldn't be verified. I went home that night and acted completely normal. David asked how my day was. I said fine. He asked what I had done. I said I had lunch with Caroline and then ran some errands. He nodded, distracted, already turning back to his laptop. I went upstairs and vomited in the bathroom, trying to be quiet enough that he wouldn't hear. Over the next 2 days, I became a spy in my own home. When David went to work, I searched his office. I looked through his files, his computer, his desk drawers. I was looking for copies of the documents I had signed, for anything that would help Marcus understand what was happening. I felt guilty and horrible, like I was betraying my husband's privacy, but a larger part of me was terrified of what I might find. I found it in a locked drawer in his desk. The key was taped to the bottom of a pencil holder. Inside the drawer was a file folder labeled with our address. Inside that folder were copies of the documents I had signed, along with several other documents I had never seen before. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the pages as I photographed every single one with my phone. I sent the photos to Marcus immediately. He called me within an hour. His voice was tight with controlled anger as he told me I needed to come to his office right now, that I needed to leave the house and come immediately. I said David would be home in a few hours and would wonder where I was. Marcus said I needed to make an excuse, any excuse, because what he was looking at was worse than he had initially thought. I told David I was going to visit Caroline, that she was having a crisis with a case and needed my support. He barely looked up from his computer. I drove to Marcus's office in a daze, my mind refusing to process what was happening. Marcus and Jennifer were waiting for me with the photos printed out and spread across the conference table. They had also pulled up public records, financial filings, corporate documents. Jennifer gestured for me to sit down and then very calmly told me that my husband had committed fraud, multiple counts of fraud. The documents I had signed weren't creating a trust to protect assets. They were transferring complete ownership of my house to David individually, not to both of us, not to a trust, to him. The way the documents were written, with language buried in dense legal paragraphs, I had essentially given my mansion away. I had signed my house over to my husband for nothing in return. But it was worse than that. Marcus pointed to several places in the documents where signatures appeared that were supposedly mine, but that I had never actually signed. They were on supporting documents, affidavits, disclosures. Someone had forged my signature on multiple pages. And based on the handwriting analysis Marcus had already started, along with the fact that I had never seen these pages, it was almost certainly David who had forged them. Jennifer pulled up financial records. She showed me that there was no financial crisis. My investments were fine. Our taxes were paid. There were no creditors, no lawsuits, no looming disasters. David had fabricated the entire crisis. Every spreadsheet, every projection, every urgent warning about financial collapse had been a lie designed to pressure me into signing away my house. I couldn't breathe. The room started spinning. Jennifer quickly brought me water and made me put my head between my knees. When I could finally speak, I asked why. Why would David do this? We were married. If we divorced, he would get half anyway, maybe more. Why would he go to such elaborate lengths to steal from me? Marcus pulled up more documents, corporation filings from 2 months ago. David had created a new investment company. He had been moving money, a lot of money, into risky ventures that had failed spectacularly. He had lost millions of dollars. Not my money, but money belonging to his firm and their clients. He was about to be discovered. He was about to be fired, possibly prosecuted. He needed money desperately, and he couldn't get it through divorce because that would take too long and would expose his financial crimes. So he had created a plan. Transfer my house into his name, sell it quickly, take the money and either run or use it to cover his losses. Either way, by the time I realized what had happened, it would be too late. The house would be gone, the money would be gone, and I would be left with nothing but legal bills trying to unravel what he had done. Jennifer said the forgery was the key. The forged signatures were felonies. Combined with the fraudulent transfer, the lies about financial crisis, the coercion, we had multiple criminal charges we could pursue. But we needed to move immediately, before David filed the transfer documents with the county and before he had a chance to sell the house. I asked what I should do. Marcus laid out a plan. First, we would file an emergency motion to block the property transfer. Second, we would notify the district attorney's office about the forgery and fraud. Third, we would gather every piece of evidence we could find about David's financial crimes and his deception. And fourth, I would need to leave the house immediately and go somewhere David couldn't find me, because when this all came crashing down, there was no telling how he would react. I called Caroline. She said I could stay with her and her husband for as long as I needed. I went home while David was still at work and packed a bag with shaking hands. I took my important documents, my laptop, jewelry my mother had left me, photographs. I walked through the mansion one more time, touching the walls, saying goodbye to the home I thought I would have forever. Then I left. I texted David from Caroline's house saying I needed a few days away to think, that I was staying with my sister, that we could talk later. He called immediately. I didn't answer. He called 17 more times. I turned off my phone. The next morning, Marcus filed the emergency motion. By noon, we had a temporary restraining order blocking David from selling, transferring, or in any way disposing of the property. By 3 p.m., detectives from the Financial Crimes Unit had contacted Marcus, asking to speak with me. By 6 p.m., David knew something was wrong. He showed up at Caroline's house. We had expected this. Caroline's husband, Frank, a former college linebacker who still looked the part, answered the door and very calmly told David that I didn't want to see him, that he needed to leave, and that if he didn't leave immediately, Frank would call the police. David yelled through the door that I was being crazy, that I was being manipulated by lawyers who just wanted my money, that we needed to talk. Caroline called the police anyway. 2 officers arrived and told David to leave. He left, but not before shouting that I was ruining everything, that I was going to regret this, that I had no idea what I was doing. Over the next week, everything unraveled. Marcus and Jennifer built an airtight case. The forged signatures were verified by a handwriting expert. The fabricated financial crisis was exposed. David's own financial crimes at his firm came to light. He had been running a Ponzi-like scheme with client money, losing millions in risky investments and covering his losses by taking money from new clients. His firm fired him and filed criminal charges. The district attorney added fraud and forgery charges related to the house. David tried to claim it was all a misunderstanding, that the documents were legitimate estate planning, that I had known what I was signing. But the evidence was overwhelming. The forged signatures alone destroyed his credibility. The fabricated spreadsheets, the fake financial projections, the pressure campaign to get me to sign without legal review, it all painted a picture of deliberate, calculated fraud. The property transfer was voided. The house remained mine. David was arrested on multiple felony counts. His bail was set at $250,000. His family, who had welcomed me so warmly 8 years ago, stopped returning my calls. His mother sent me a letter calling me vindictive and cruel, saying I was destroying her son's life. I didn't respond. The divorce was ugly but swift. With criminal charges pending, David's attorney advised him not to fight. I kept the house and most of our assets. David faced up to 15 years in prison across all charges. I sat in the courtroom during his preliminary hearing and watched him try to maintain his composure as the prosecutor laid out the evidence against him. He looked at me once. I looked back. There was no recognition in his eyes, no remorse, just cold calculation about his own survival. He took a plea deal. 7 years in federal prison, restitution to his victims, permanent revocation of his financial licenses. I wasn't in the courtroom when he was sentenced. Marcus went and sent me a text afterward saying it was done, that justice had been served, that I could move forward. But moving forward wasn't simple. I stayed in the mansion for a few months after everything was finalized, but it didn't feel like home anymore. Every room held memories of the man I thought I had married, the life I thought I was building. I couldn't walk through the dining room without seeing us sitting at that table while I signed away my rights. I couldn't sit in the library without remembering him opening that leather folder and beginning the lies. I sold the house 6 months later for $12.3 million. I bought a smaller place in Brookline, something beautiful but not ostentatious, something that was mine from the beginning without any of David's fingerprints on it. I donated a substantial portion of the money from the house sale to organizations that help women escape financial abuse, that provide legal services to domestic violence survivors. I wanted something good to come from all of this. Patricia, my attorney, who had warned me years ago about getting a post-nuptial agreement, took me to lunch after everything was over. She didn't say, "I told you so." She just held my hand across the table and said she was proud of how I had fought back, how I had trusted my instincts when everything seemed wrong. She said too many women in my position convince themselves they're being paranoid, that they talk themselves out of their own perceptions until it's too late. Caroline said the same thing. She said that when I had told her about signing those documents, the look on my face had told her everything she needed to know. She said I had looked haunted, trapped, like I knew something terrible had happened but couldn't articulate it. She said she was glad she had pushed, glad she had called Marcus immediately, because if we had waited even a few more days, the transfer might have been finalized and everything would have been much harder to unravel. I think about that a lot, about how close I came to losing everything, about how David had calculated every step, had manipulated me so carefully, had used my love and trust as weapons against me, about how the man I had built a life with, the man I had trusted with my heart and my future, had been willing to destroy me completely for his own gain. But I also think about how I fought back, how even in my confusion and fear, some part of me knew something was wrong and reached out for help, how my sister dropped everything to protect me, how Marcus and Jennifer worked tirelessly to build the case that saved my financial life, how the legal system, for all its flaws, actually worked to protect me and punish the person who had tried to victimize me. I'm not the same woman I was before all of this happened. I'm harder in some ways, less trusting, more guarded. I verify everything now. I read every document. I never sign anything without my attorney reviewing it first, no matter who is asking, no matter how urgent they claim it is. I protect myself because I learned the hard way that no one else will do it for me. But I'm also stronger. I survived something that was designed to destroy me. I stood up in court and told my story. I helped build the case that put a criminal in prison. I took control of my life and my finances and my future. I refused to be a victim. It's been 3 years now. David is in his 5th year of his sentence. I never visit, never write, never think about him unless I have to. I've dated a little, though trust doesn't come easily anymore. I'm okay with that. I'd rather be alone and safe than in a relationship where I have to doubt my own perceptions. I still have moments where I think about that night at the dining room table, my hand shaking as I signed those documents, David's hand on my shoulder squeezing hard enough to bruise. I think about how different things could have been if I had just trusted my instincts, if I had called Patricia before signing, if I had been brave enough to say no even when David was crying and telling me I was destroying us. But I also know that financial abuse and manipulation are designed to overcome exactly those instincts. David had spent months, maybe years, grooming me to doubt myself, to defer to his expertise, to feel guilty for questioning him. By the time that night came, I was primed to sign. The work had already been done. The trap had already been set. I just walked into it. What saved me wasn't being smarter or stronger or more careful. What saved me was having people who loved me and who recognized the signs of abuse when I couldn't see them myself. What saved me was a sister who asked the right questions and an attorney who took my case seriously and moved with urgency. What saved me was a legal system that recognized forgery and fraud and coercion for what they were. I tell this story now because I know I'm not the only one. I know there are women and men right now in situations like mine, feeling confused and pressured and scared, signing documents they don't understand because someone they love is telling them it's necessary. I know there are people who think it couldn't happen to them, who think they're too smart or too successful or too careful to be manipulated like I was. I want them to know that intelligence and success don't protect you from abuse. I had built and sold 3 companies. I had negotiated complex deals with Fortune 500 corporations. I had managed millions of dollars in business transactions. And I still fell for it. I still signed those papers. I still almost lost everything. The lesson isn't that you should never trust anyone. The lesson is that trust should never mean abandoning your right to understand what you're signing, to seek independent advice, to ask questions until you get answers that make sense. The lesson is that urgency is a weapon abusers use, that real financial professionals don't pressure you to sign documents immediately without review, that anyone who gets angry when you want to consult your own attorney is someone you should be very wary of. The lesson is that if something feels wrong, it probably is wrong. Trust that feeling. Honor that instinct, even if you can't articulate why. Even if the person pressuring you is someone you love. Even if you're afraid of seeming paranoid or difficult or untrusting, your instincts exist to protect you. Listen to them. And if you're in a situation like I was, if you've already signed documents you didn't understand, if you're feeling trapped and scared and helpless, please know that it's not too late. Reach out to an attorney. Talk to someone you trust. There are people who specialize in exactly these situations, who understand the legal mechanisms of financial abuse, who can help you untangle what's been done and fight back. I got my life back. I got my freedom back. I got justice. Not everyone does, and I know how lucky I am. But I also know I created some of that luck by being brave enough to admit something was wrong, by reaching out for help, by trusting the experts who could see what I couldn't. David tried to take everything from me, my home, my security, my future. He almost succeeded, but in the end, all he did was teach me how strong I really am, how important it is to protect yourself, and how precious freedom is when you've almost lost it. I live in my home in Brookline now, and every morning when I wake up, I remember that this is mine. Not because a man gave it to me, not because I compromised myself to keep it, but because I fought for it, because I stood up for myself, because I refused to be erased. That's worth more than any mansion ever could be.